no. Hey, we're back again to talk about breaking down the mechanics. Tim and I just finished the Southern Ohio Forest Rally, and we're going to talk a little bit about our experience, some things that happened. Obviously, in breaking down the mechanics, we're going to talk about the cars. The last videos we were able to go through my diff, and I got to actually drive the rally with my diff, and it went really well. And we had some issues with your car, so we're going to talk about those a little bit, and tell us maybe a little bit of what happened, Tim.
Well, on yours you have the transaxle. Your differential is in the transaxle. So my car is a little different. It has a transmission and a rear axle. So we're going to kind of go over a little bit of the differences between a front-wheel drive transverse transaxle and a rear-wheel drive inline engine with a transmission and a rear axle. So I had a couple of problems. One is the first day, oil pressure dropped, fuel pump shut off, and it put me out.
There's no oil pressure.
And I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to fix that. Everything is great when the oil pressure drops, and the fuel pump is activated by the oil pressure switch. So good
Some
thing.
gremlins. Sounds like we're not quite sure what it is.
I'm not yet, but I'm glad that the fuel pump shut off before the engine blew up.
Right.
So we'll talk a little bit more about that when I figure it out. What actually happened was I was having a problem with the brakes. I didn't think I could stop. I shifted down too soon. And with that much speed shifting down, there was a lot of grip. And it ended up breaking my center of the clutch out. The center of the clutch is probably the weak point in the drivetrain.
Okay.
So if you shock load your drivetrain, like shift down too soon or dump the clutch too hard, the torque will probably break the clutch. This transmission is very strong. I thought that was the problem, but so I want to show you what a clutch does and how it works and what I think I got to do to fix this problem.
So we moved a little bit down the shop here, and we've got a little display. Right here we have a transaxle transmission, which we talked about in the last video with the differential on the side here. And you can go back to our last video and see what that looks like. Tim, take us through what we have here.
So yeah, we covered a lot of the front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive transaxle. I want to talk about rear-wheel drive inline engine. So it's a little different. You know, you have your engine driving in front of the transmission. Hooked to the engine is a flywheel. This hooks to the crankshaft. On the flywheel, we have a clutch disc, which is what broke on me, and then we have a clutch cover. So that's what we're trying to work on, is how this works. When you push the clutch in, it releases the engine from the transmission. So this is where the engine would drive power in with the clutch disc. So if we put this here, you're going to see that engine is hooked here to the flywheel. When you push the clutch in, it allows this to slip. So when the engine is spinning and this is clutch in, this is not moving, so there's no drive to the transmission. And once you've got drive into your transmission, of course, you have multiple gears. Our shifter on this particular one is external, like a proper American car. And then it comes out the back of the transmission through the drive shaft. From the drive shaft, it goes into the rear differential through the pinion gear. The pinion gear drives the ring gear, and inside is the differential here. So the differential with the gears that allow one axle to turn faster than the other is done in the rear, different than it would be in the front on a front-wheel drive, the rear of a rear-wheel drive.
So we're thinking in your American car, rear-wheel drive, you got the transmission in the front, and you just worked your way back with the drive shaft and now into the rear differential.
Yeah, and this is pretty standard on trucks. Most vehicles have engine and transmission in the front and the drive in the back. So what we were talking about with the clutch, what happened on my car was I shifted down too early, and I broke my clutch. So the only thing on these cars, the center where the power is got a riveted hub. And what happened on my car was the rivets broke, and I lost all drive to the transmission. So that was my fault because, one, the clutch that I had purchased and put in the car was good for the engine horsepower, but remember, in rally racing, the shock loading is so hard, you're on and off the gas, and it will like shifted really too quick, and it downshifted so hard that it snapped all the rivets off. So this is good for about 350 horsepower. The one that I put in, or I'm going to put in, will be good for 650 horsepower. So it's twice as much horsepower as I need. That should handle the shock loading that I plan on giving it.
So can we maybe just, let's go back a little bit and talk about this system specifically. So this is the clutch cover.
Yeah, or the pressure plate. They'll call it both.
Plate.
Yep.
And this is the flywheel.
Yep.
And then the clutch was in the middle.
Right here, it's pretty heavy.
Yeah, I can hold it. So show us maybe a little bit
on the
about.
other side.
Okay.
So
obviously I don't know what I'm doing.
the flywheel is driven by the engine, right? The ring gear, that's where your starter hooks on. This is the big heavy flywheel on a big American V8. It has a very heavy flywheel. And then we'll have our clutch disc. On this particular one, the clutch disc, I have only the stock original clutch disc with no springs. The other thing is, when you take a clutch disc, a regular car has springs, and in the center, it absorbs a lot of that energy with these springs. So I didn't have that. I had a solid core one, and that also transmits too much load, and that's probably one of the reasons it broke the rivets. So my new clutch is made for a lot more horsepower, and it has springs, and it has ability to absorb the shock loading.
What kind of clutch did you get for your new one?
It's a Ram clutch for stock cars.
Nice.
Or big, heavy. This cover isn't exactly the one, but that goes on this particular flywheel. But the clutch cover is bolted to the flywheel, and this clutch cover has these massive springs that clamp the cover to the flywheel and makes the clutch plate tight. And that's what drives your car, is this clamping force making this clutch, and it makes it so it doesn't slip.
It's amazing to think about, like, how that isn't just a massive failure all the time, like the science in this piece.
That's all that drives your car.
That's amazing.
And this fiber that is made out of asbestos probably, or made out of really
Something that we
good,
don't like. Yeah.
right, good material. It's made so when you let the clutch out, it engages and it's a smooth transition. So if you're driving your car poorly and you're slipping the clutch and you're not letting the clutch out quick enough, or you rev the engine when you let the clutch out, this just slips and spins and gets hot and wears out. So everything needs a wear item. Something's going to give. So the clutch is what gives in your drivetrain.
It's a part made to eventually fail.
Yes, and if you rev your engine too much and dump your clutch too hard, you can break. I broke the rivets, but you can break the rivets off here. You can slip. There's a lot you can do to mess it up. So the question a lot of people says, well, if this clamps, how do you push that in while it's spinning?
Right.
So what we have is a throw-out bearing. On this particular car, it's a hydraulic clutch. Okay. So what that means, a hydraulic clutch, your clutch pedal puts pressure in here, and that pushes this bearing out. When this bearing gets pushed into the pressure plate, it pushes these springs in, and that releases this cover, and it allows this to spin. Okay. So when you push in, it pushes in the clutch cover springs. That releases the pressure on the clutch disc and allows you to sit there and not move when you're in gear.
That's amazing. Those are tough. I can't even push that in.
And this is actually out from a Mitsubishi, which the AMC ones are much bigger and meaner. Here's a different kind of hydraulic
throw-out bearing?
Well, it's a throw-out bearing. It's a hydraulic slave cylinder. So this is, the master is on the clutch pedal, and this is the slave. So when you push on the clutch, fluid goes in there, and it pushes this out. This is actually from a NASCAR. That's the difference between a NASCAR and a normal car. You know, I mean a normal car being a smaller passenger vehicle.
Right.
And yeah, so you can see that that bearing turns.
Okay.
So when you push the clutch in, this comes out, the bearing turns, it goes up against
The pressure plate.
against here. Well, this is spinning, and then the
It's violent.
It
This
is.
whole thing is pretty
It's
violent.
very hot.
So, and there's no fluid in here, the grease or anything, because you need that friction.
Right.
So-
You know, the fluid comes in and it just goes in here, and it allows this to move.
Okay.
And I couldn't show it to you. The other thing is, on American cars, most of them originally didn't have hydraulic clutch. The original AMC clutch release mechanism was a rod from your clutch pedal going to a pivot that went from the engine to the frame, and then it had another rod off that, and when you pushed on the clutch, it pushed this one rod, and that pushed another rod, and that pushed on a lever, which levered over and pushed. They were awful.
That was probably the best at the time.
At the time, it worked good, but what happens is there's too many rods and levers that fail, and they get worn out or they get out of adjustment. So most of us use a hydraulic clutch because it's clutch in, clutch out. It's not much travel.
So maybe let's have you take us, Tim, to your car, and we'll actually look at what broke.
Okay, so we're gonna have to get underneath the car.
Perfect. All right.
So we'll take this apart here in a few minutes, and I'll show you a little better. Bad rally driver.